Hi everyone, today I'd like to speak about Conor McGregor and his interview with Tucker Carlson here in Dublin. This took place over the past number of days, but the video was released on Good Friday. Tucker Carlson was in Dublin over the past number of days. He was pictured alongside McGregor and a few others in around Dublin city centre, in around government buildings, and also up at Conor McGregor's pub, which is out in Drimna, Dublin 12. Now, what's really important with this is we've seen over the past number of weeks McGregor on his push for Irish presidency. And of course, this interview will get out to a worldwide audience because of Tucker Carlson's massive presence online. Now, what's also important with this, and I want to go into a little bit of detail, is on the facts of the interview. We saw McGregor on St. Patrick's Day with Donald Trump, and he spoke briefly to the media, probably about a minute and a half, 2 minutes on the plinth at the press office in the White House, where he spoke about immigration. He spoke about a number of other factors, but didn't go into any much detail. But in the interview he gave with Tucker Carlson, it was well over an hour, and I want to go into that in a little bit of detail. And just let me know, first of all, what you think of the interview if you've seen it, and what you think of what is really going on. And now what's really important with this is that the interview was held in the Freemasons Hall on Molesworth Street. Now that's an interesting choice of location because everybody knows about the involvement of the Freemasons, for instance, with the Orange Order in Ireland. We've seen that, for instance, with the inception of the Irish Free State, where we saw British imperialism essentially working in cahoots with the Orange Order and with members of the so-called Masons to push their agenda to control essentially the narrative in Irish society. And also what's important as well, since 1920, when W.T. Cosgrave was the Taoiseach and the first Prime Minister of the Irish Free State, he opened up the door to Shannon Éireann, to open up the door to having a certain percentage of the Orange Order to be representative on an elitist institution, which is the Senate. Now, 60% of those who were appointed were Freemasons. So that's important to note in terms of the historical context. But let me know what you think about McGregor's choice of vocation. He was photographed sitting in the chair of the head of the Freemasons in Ireland as well, which I found rather interesting, to put it very mildly. But let me know what you think in the comments about this as well, because this symbolism I would view as important, and in particular when it comes down to on Good Friday when the video was released as well. Now, of course, it's across the street from Leinster House, and it was founded by the Duke of Leinster, of course, well over a century and a half ago. And what's also very revealing is Tucker Carlson, of course, would probably like the architecturally heritage and these sort of buildings that are really in around Dublin City as well. But let's get into the interview in a few facts around the interview. He spoke initially about his background, and I found that important because McGregor spoke about his background in Crumlin, a particularly strong working class area that I know very well, and a lot of friends in as well. And of course he spoke about the sense of community, which is vitally important in Crumlin because that's what working class communities were built on, and fundamentally agree with his point of view on the whole sense of community, and community is being eroded across the country, which I fundamentally couldn't argue and couldn't disagree with in terms of his point. Of course, he spoke about the issues around Irish democracy, which I found very, very important. And I fundamentally agreed with what that point he was making in terms of Irish democracy. He said about Ireland has a cosy clique. He said as well, many of these politicians bend the knee to their masters. He didn't specifically mention Brussels or the European Union, which I found sort of, something that maybe his political understanding maybe doesn't go quite far enough in terms of the power brokers in society and who they really represent. Or perhaps he's just been maybe coy with what he's saying to Tucker Carlson, but I found it interesting anyway. And at the same time, he said that they should bend the knee, as I said, to their masters above them. I didn't specify who they were. He talked about globalism, and he also said that he wants to get on the ticket to be presidency, which is the election is due to come up in November this year. Now, this is important because to become president in Ireland, you need the support of 4 county councils and, of course, 20 members of the Oireachtas. And, of course, many of them are whipped by the party. And it is very much of a cosy clique and a bit of a difficult challenge to get on the ticket. So it should be open to everybody fundamentally as well. I fundamentally agree with that point of view on that, because it has become really, really elitist and out of touch, and it's a closed shop essentially to what's going on in society. And McGregor, to an extent, has been speaking for an anti-establishment narrative in terms of talking about issues that are affecting people, which are getting out to a wider audience, which is important. But at the same time, the message should be articulated, I would argue, in a proper fashion, where people are standing up for the interests of working class people, and that needs systemic change, I would argue, in Irish society. He also spoke about safety and security in Ireland. He spoke about the issues with the country being overrun and focused on money and many issues, which he's quite right in terms of the money-making issue that's taken place and scam that's taken place through the immigration industry. I've spoken about it many, many times in my videos in terms of the huge transfer of public wealth into private hands to make them richer, and at the same time, he didn't mention the fact about cheap labour, running out workers' pay and conditions, which I think is important. It's not just all about legal immigration, it's about the work permit system, it's about diverting that money to support families in Ireland, I would argue, to build proper communities and support people where they can live in homes that are affordable, which helps our decline in birth rate. But of course, this wasn't mentioned during the interview. But again, at the same time, there was other issues brought up where he also said Ireland was the greatest country in the world, which I agree with. Couldn't disagree with that point of view as well. But a lot of other issues I think are important. He spoke about labels, and he spoke about getting called certain names. He said he's centre and he's grounded. Even you look at all the issues of this so-called far right, far left debate that takes place in Irish society, a lot of people want to put the needs of the citizens first, and fundamentally that's really what's important across Ireland. We look at, especially coming up to Easter now with the whole time of the proclamation, where you should cherish all the children of the nation equally. It's vitally important now, the more than ever, that that's revisited, especially in the context of the time as well. But it is important in terms of the symbolism that's taken place. He also spoke about the EU Migration Pact, which I think is important. Of course, the government are trying to rush that through, and in fairness, he's the only candidate so far who's even thinking about running for presidency, even with his platform that has said he would be looking at opposing that, which I think is vitally important. So let's see what other candidates try and create some sort of noise around this issue as well, which is vitally important. But again, we know the president, essentially his power is largely ceremonial. He can sign legislation into law or else refer it to the Council of State or the Supreme Court for judgment as well, which I think is vitally important just as a platform. But also what's important is the context of the media. Tucker Carlson made a funny remark about media, Irish state media being similar to North Korea, state propaganda, which you couldn't agree more with. I'm sure the media classes in Ireland won't be too happy with all of this talk about the so-called state media, all that pushes the government's narrative every single day of the week, which I fundamentally agree with. So it's getting out to a wider audience. A lot of issues there, for instance, that were discussed. Very little on policy, very little on directions, very little on the multinationals and the corporations. But again, the bigger issue is getting out to a wider audience. But at the same time, where does anything go, for instance, in terms of building Ireland? You need to build it from communities. We need to build it from ground up. We need to build it from talking to our friends, talking to our neighbours, and effecting change that way, and not looking to individuals, for instance, that will bring us to the so-called promised land. It's looking to each and every one of us, and that's where change fundamentally comes from. Real change comes from below. It doesn't come from any elected people into positions of power who will, to a massive extent, could bend the knee to their masters above them, essentially through Brussels, through other institutions. We've seen that through the globalist institutions also as well, that serve the interests of the very, very rich in society. But it was very interesting, revealing, and I know in the context of the venue, I think it was important, and struck an issue that we should discuss as well. But I'd really like to let you know, or let me know what you think as well, which is important. What's your view of what's going on as well? But fundamentally, my view is we need change from below to make that effective change, rather than look to individuals, for instance, who could, for instance, be using different motives or different agendas, perhaps, rather than the interests of ordinary working class people, to stand up for the interests of people that would effectively change the whole conditions of society, and revisit the proclamation, which is vitally important now more than ever, and put it into practice in our daily lives, which is critically important. So thanks so much for the support of my videos. Very happy Easter to everybody who subscribes to my channel, and thanks so much for sharing my videos. And I'm glad you enjoyed my last video I did on Mount Argus in the context of Joseph Plunkett, Patrick Pearse as well, and I'll add a link to that in the comments below as well, in terms of our history and the huge involvement of people in our society, that we should be proud of our ancestors and so many, our family generations as well. We have a proud and rich history in our country. So thanks from Dublin and Slán. I'll talk to you all soon. Bye bye.